Has your scope of work gotten you into an unlimited revision sort of problem? Let's talk about how to avoid something like that. Two critical contract clauses that save service providers all the time. Number one, clear scope of work. Number two, change order process. Let's talk about it. My name is Dustin Lee. I'm the founding attorney at Ascend Legal Solutions, a Texas business law firm. This video is for educational and informational purposes. If you have any legal questions, you should always seek counsel from an experienced business law lawyer in your jurisdiction. Let's get into it. In this video, I'm going to explain a few things to you. Number one, what is scope creep? Number two, what are the most common reasons that it happens? Number three, how you could possibly prevent it. Number four, what can go wrong if those clauses don't exist. And then number five, how to protect your contracts and your relationships with your client with clear scope. What is scope creep? Well, defined really simply in sort of common business terms, it's whenever you end up doing work that's outside of your original scope that you didn't intend to do. It usually starts pretty innocently with your client asking you, hey, can we hop on one more phone call? Or can I have one more session? Or, can we make one more revision to this? Can I add an extra page? Things like this. But it can become a problem because when that additional scope is added on, either maybe you invoice for it and they didn't expect to pay for it. Maybe they expected it for free. Or maybe you missed the deadline on the project because this got added on. As a provider, you end up trapped feeling, well, I need to give them this one more thing, and then maybe one more thing, and then there's another thing, and then potentially another thing. And at some point, the relationship turns into resentment. You resent your client for pushing and pushing for more things that you think should not have been in the original scope. Client resents you for potentially not delivering what they thought you were going to deliver, or for charging for something that they did not think that you were going to charge for. In Texas, the general rule of thumb, the courts are going to look at what's on the four corners of the page as the North Star for what's in the contract and what are the terms, not what are the additional discussions after, pushing for more or billing for more. And so if your contract is not very tight, very clear, very specific, you may be putting yourself on the hook to do more work than you thought you were going to have to do, potentially not even getting paid for it. Now we're going to go over a handful of reasons that scope creep happens so often, or just the most common examples of it. So first are bad scope descriptions. If you haven't properly defined your scope in the first place, that's where a lot of these problems come up. If your scope is very broad or general, non-specific, it leaves your client the ability to push for more and more because the more and more that they're pushing for does happen to fall under that very general scope description. And then on the flip side, you're trying to limit it because you say it's very general scope description, and that makes the client unhappy because they thought they were getting more. Deliverables not being itemized is another item that falls within this sort of category of an incomplete or too broad of a scope. If you don't itemize the deliverables that you're actually going to be handing your client in this project, they may push for more. If the general description doesn't provide them an accurate description of what the deliverables are, they're going to ask for more deliverables and they're going to want to pay nothing. The next big hurdle is no change order process. Now, this is a common term in construction contracts, but really it can be applied to any sort of contract where the client requests that you do additional work. It's great. You'd love to do additional work. You love to get paid to do additional work. The client wants to get the work done. Everybody seems to be on the same page. You have to have a process to go through to get that work approved and to get paid for that work. And if you don't have a process to go through for that, you could leave yourself either doing the work for free or the client very unhappy because the work didn't get done. The next one we see a lot is unlimited revisions or unlimited edits sort of thing. This just really leaves you on the hook for unlimited work. It's a really dangerous thing to put into a contract. The next thing is no checkpoints or timeline. If you don't give a timeline about when something is going to be delivered, there's really no expectations on the sides of you or the client. And if it's something to where it just has to fit into your schedule, at least you have to have a discussion about that with the client, even if it's not incorporated into the contract as a timeline for expectation management purposes. And then usually, even if there's not a specific timeline that has to be accomplished within the project or the contract, you're still going to be providing check-ins to make sure that everyone is on the same page, that progress is being made, and that everyone's expectations are being measured appropriately. The last thing to talk about here is that good faith and common sense and what's reasonable are out the window here. You have to look at exactly what is in the contract, because you'll have clients push to do more work, and when they're not acting in good faith, you may not have anything to do about that. It may not make sense to you that what they want is not included in the scope, but it may make perfect sense to them. So common sense is very relative, and what is reasonable is very relative. So what you think is common sense and reasonable for you may not be common sense and reasonable for your client. And because of that, you may not have a meeting of the minds on what the proper scope in this contract should be. So again, very important to lay it all out, make it very specific. Okay, so what do you need to include in your contracts to avoid all of these problems? Number one is a very clear, very specific and detailed scope provision. That way it spells out exactly what everyone's expectations are for the project, what you're supposed to deliver, and when, and it lays out specific tasks or specific outputs or deliverables for the project, so everyone's on the same page. A couple of pro tips: you could even put in the timeline, you could put in what counts as complete, you could put in a revision process that has a limited scope, and another pro tip, you could even include what is not. So for example, you could say, A, here's the scope, B, these things specifically are not within the scope. So that way, when it's read out, everyone has completely clear expectations that none of these things in this list are included in your scope. The second thing that's going to provide protection for you is a change order clause. It's going to go over when changes need to be made, how they're approved, and how they're paid for. And a clause like this is going to allow you and your client or your customer a good process to work together in cooperation to expand the scope of the project so that you make more money and they get more benefits. Another pro tip here, there is such a thing as waiver. So for example, if you have all this clearly spelled out in your contract and then you don't follow through with the contractual procedures, they may try to argue that you waived the contractual procedures and now you're required to do it anyway. So again, seeking advice of counsel really helps in a situation like this, but also sticking to the contract helps in a situation like this. Another clause that helps if you're in an industry that does a lot of revisions, like let's say you produce documents for someone or video for someone, if you're producing, say, ad copy or something along those lines, anything that may require a little bit of back and forth with your client, put a specific cap on the number of revisions that you will do within the scope of this project so that you don't get hooked into an unlimited revisions sort of situation. Another nice contract clause to have is an approval process, or at least some sort of clear and specific way to define when the work is done. And then finally, even if you don't have the change order process, which I do usually recommend that people have, at least you could have some sort of rate adjustment or price adjustment provision in saying that, hey, the first 2 revisions are free, for example, and then after that, it's X number of dollars per revision. So that way you've already got it built into your contract what the price is going to be for additional revisions or additional work, at least for the anticipated types of work that you may have to be doing. And that way, again, both you and the client have clear expectations about what the scope is and how billing is going to work. So if you notice a theme here, we're wanting our contract to be clear, specific, and predictable in a way that's going to manage everyone's expectations and just create a good working relationship for you and your client. What are the 3 biggest problems that you run into when you don't have a clear contract on these things? Number 1 is that you end up doing work for free, and then you're losing money, you're losing leverage on the project, and it ends up being a situation where if you're in that with a lot of clients, it could potentially even jeopardize your entire business. So you don't want to be in the situation where you're working for free, especially for multiple clients. The second big problem that can pop up is where you decline to work for free on something that the client believes should be included. And then at that point, the client's very unhappy, the client's unsatisfied. You could get a bad review. You could potentially jeopardize your future working relationship with the client and anybody that they may have referred you or would have referred you. So in a situation like that, now you're damaging client relationships, which also can be very damaging for your business. And then of course, the final thing is we always hope we can work out and resolve any of these things amicably. But if it ends up in court, if there's not a documentation, if there's not a paper trail on the scope, on the changes, and a clear process and what everybody's expectations were, it makes the lawsuit a bit of a mess, a he said, she said situation. in which you're leaving your case in the hands of the judge or the jury to decide your fate. And you never want to do that. And then what are the benefits? We've kind of talked about them a little bit, but it's really great to build a cooperative relationship with your client at the outset because expectations are clearly managed and the scope is very clear and unambiguous. It reduces friction. It lets you set expectations early. It gives you a professional way to prevent doing work for free and expanding the scope in case you do get a client that wants to push on that a little bit. And it helps you avoid disputes. It keeps the working relationship stronger so that you potentially can continue to work with this client, other clients that they refer, and get positive reviews on down the line. All in all, it sounds like a very woo-woo kumbaya sort of thing, but at the end of the day, it's really, really important to have this cooperative and collaborative working relationship with your client. And it starts with having a really clear scope, and it starts with having the proper contractual provisions in place. And if you're working with an independent contractor, it's really critical to know whether this person is an employee or independent contractor, so you can actually check out that video. And in addition to the contract here, you may be having contractual negotiations, say with an independent contract. And we have another video about whether or not a person should be classified as an employee or an independent contractor, and you can check that out. Also, if you like business law content, please feel free to check out the other videos on the page or check out our website. Thanks.